Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Gaudette, and welcome back to another installment of Top 5 Albums, the series where I walk you through my 5 favorite albums from every year. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the final year of the 70s decade, 1979, and it's been really amazing seeing how music has evolved throughout the decade of the 70s, between the technological advancements that took place, the evolution of the styles of music that had been established in the mid to late 60s, as well as the emergence and development of so many new styles of music that have yet to be explored. This period was truly a creative explosion, and it produced countless albums that will forever be regarded as some of the best records of all time. So it's been a real treat going through this decade and seeing the evolution of music throughout this 9-year period. So without further ado, here are my top 5 favorite albums of 1979, starting with number 5. Okay, coming in at number 5 is Fear of Music by the Talking Heads. One of the great records to come out of the Talking Heads discography. This is their 3rd studio album, and at this point in their discography, they had started doing some more experimentation from a songwriting perspective, and in general, this album does take on more of a darker sort of tone, and we're hearing some new influences coming in with the addition of some Afrobeat feels, which was heavily influenced by Fela Kuti, and the album captures that perfect blend of funk, new wave, art rock, and Afrobeat. Brian Eno is on production, and he is really stretching things out and adding so many additional layers and textures to enhance these already incredible songs. And he even co-wrote a couple of the songs on here as well. This album would also spawn their most popular hit up to that point with Life During Wartime, which is a classic Talking Heads track. My personal favorite songs on here would be Mind, Heaven, Cities, Air, and the closing track, Drugs, which has Brian Eno flavorings all over it and is the perfect track to conclude this incredible album. And I think they really made some magic happen on this record. They continued to evolve their sound and stretch things out even more while producing some classic and top-notch Talking Heads songs that were produced just so beautifully by Brian Eno. And this would be one of my favorite records of the Talking Heads discography. And if you're interested in hearing my full thoughts on Talking Heads' full studio discography, I have a video where I rank all of their studio records. So if you're interested in that, be sure to check out the tier list playlist, which will be linked in the comments and the description. So that is my number 5 album of 1979. Now on to number 4. Coming in at number 4, we've got Discovery by Electric Light Orchestra. This is an ELO record that doesn't get the credit that it deserves, in my opinion. There were so many incredible records that preceded this one, so because of that, sometimes I feel like this record gets kind of overshadowed by the albums that came out before it, but I regard this as an incredible record to come out of their discography, and would even make my list of top 5 ELO records. This album takes on a pop rock, progressive rock sort of feel, but also starts incorporating some disco elements on select tracks, which was a style of music that was becoming much more prevalent in the late 70s. And I think Jeff Lynne incorporated some of these disco elements in a very effective manner, where it still very much sounds like Electric Light Orchestra. This album features 9 songs, and from front to back, I think this record is absolutely spectacular. From one song to the next, it's got a really great pacing, and like I said, it still contains all of those core elements of the ELO sound. My personal favorite song on here would be The Diary of Horace Wimp. I think that song is so beautiful. And a couple of other favorites would be Shine a Little Love, Last Train to London, Wishing, and the closing track, Don't Bring Me Down, which is an ELO classic. I think the track Wishing would be the unsung hero of this record. I think that's a very underrated ELO ballad that is just so beautiful. So I know not every ELO fan holds this album in high regard, but I really resonate with all of the songs throughout this track listing. I think they incorporated the disco elements in a very effective way, and I think they delivered 9 songs that are very, very solid, and a couple that I would regard as some of my favorite Electric Light Orchestra tracks. And if you're interested in hearing my full thoughts on ELO's entire discography, I have a video where I rank all of their studio albums, so be sure to check that one out as well in the tier list playlist linked in the comments and the description. So that is my number 4 album. Now on to number 3. Alright, coming in at number 3 is The Wall by Pink Floyd. This one is regarded as one of the classic records of the Pink Floyd discography, and I think that is for very good reason. This is a concept album and a rock opera that does a lot of commentary on feelings of isolation and disconnect, which is symbolized by the building of a wall around the main character who's named Pink, and this main character is actually based off of Syd Barrett. And some other tracks contain some commentary on different events that affected Roger Waters' life, like losing his father in World War II. And Roger Waters wrote the majority of the tracks on here, with a couple of collaborations with David Gilmour here and there. And when it comes to double albums, I think this one is about as good as it gets. All 4 sides are so engaging, and you never know what to expect from one track to the next. And it produced a good handful of some of the most classic Pink Floyd songs of all time, like Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, Hey You, Comfortably Numb, and Run Like Hell. And musically, some of these tracks go into some very dark and ominous territories on songs like Hey You, One of My Turns, Is There Anybody Out There, and Don't Leave Me Now, which is a truly haunting track and a perfect example of the darker side of Roger Waters' writing style. And that's a style of writing that I think he does exceptionally well, and I always love when he ventures off into some of those more eerie and dark territories. In addition to Roger's incredible songwriting, we also have some exceptional guitar solos from David Gilmour, with the obvious one being his 2 solos on Comfortably Numb. But my personal favorite solo of his on here, and one of my all-time favorite David Gilmour solos, would be the solo on Mother. I just think that is such a beautiful and melodic guitar solo that showcases all of the best sides of David Gilmour's playing, and there are tons of great solos all throughout this record. As far as favorite tracks go, if I had to narrow it down to a few, I would go with Hey You, Goodbye Blue Sky, In the Flesh, and Mother. So I think this is an incredible record, one of the best to come out of the Pink Floyd discography. And if you're interested in hearing my full thoughts on Pink Floyd's full discography, I also did a video ranking all of their studio albums, so be sure to check that one out as well in the tier list playlist, which is linked in the comments and the description. So that is my number 3 album. Now on to number 2. Coming in at number 2 is I Am by Earth, Wind & Fire, an incredible album to come out of one of my all-time favorite funk and soul groups. In my opinion, this is one of the best records of their discography, and now that we're into the late 70s, the disco movement was in full effect, and they did a great job of incorporating some of those disco elements on this record, but still retaining those core elements of their sound with the funk, soul, and R&B. There are so many exceptional songs throughout this 9-song track listing, with tracks like In the Stone, Can't Let Go, Boogie Wonderland, Star, and After the Love Is Gone, which is in my opinion the most beautiful ballad that Earth, Wind & Fire has ever written. It might even be my number 1 favorite Earth, Wind & Fire song. I think that track is just absolutely perfect. And while this album is filled with so many incredible hits, I think the B-sides are just as strong, with tracks like Let Your Feelings Show, Wait, and the closing track, You and I. Aside from After the Love Has Gone, if I had to pick a couple of other favorites on here, I would have to go with Can't Let Go and Star, and I just cannot say enough good things about this record. From front to back, the track listing is so consistent, it almost plays through like a greatest hits record. There are so many hits to come out of this, and these tracks all groove super hard, but still contain all of those elements that make Earth, Wind & Fire such a unique band, with their interesting chord progressions and more modern, jazzy sense of harmony, as well as their rock-solid horn section, which takes these great songs and makes them even better and adds even more depth to them. And I think the mid to late 70s were the best period of the Earth, Wind & Fire discography, and it all culminated into the release of this record, which I consider to be one of the best albums of their entire discography. So that is my number 2 record. Now for the grand reveal, here is my number 1 favorite album of 1979. Okay, coming in as my number 1 favorite album of 1979, I picked Drums and Wires by XTC. This was a groundbreaking album for XTC on multiple different fronts. This was their first record to feature Dave Gregory on guitar, which would solidify what is known as the classic XTC lineup of Andy Partridge, Colin Moulding, Dave Gregory, and Terry Chambers. And this was the first record where they really settled into their sound and the style that they wanted to continue to build off of. This was their third studio album, and they have a couple of tracks that are in a similar stylistic territory to what they were doing on their first two records. But we also hear them venture out into some much more experimental territories. And now with the addition of a second guitar, it really opened up a whole new world of possibilities for them to experiment with. And the writing between the two guitars on this record is some truly unique and unorthodox guitar writing. Some of the coolest guitar parts of any album to come out of the 70s, in my opinion. There are so many parts that incorporate really interesting rhythmic variations between the two parts, as well as having some very dissonant and tense sorts of harmonies that is a staple of the XTC sound, and I think we really start to hear that come out more and more on this record. And you can hear a lot of these kinds of guitar parts on tracks like Day In, Day Out, Roads Girdle the Globe, and Millions. Compositionally, there is so much amazing stuff throughout this 12-song track listing. As is the case with most XTC records, we have Andy Partridge writing the majority of the songs, with Colin Moulding writing 4 of the tracks. And I've always thought that Andy and Colin's writing styles balance each other out so nicely. For the Colin Moulding tracks, the most noteworthy one would be the opening song, Making Plans for Nigel, which is one of the most classic XTC songs of all time, and I don't think they could have opened this album with a better track, and in my opinion, it is one of the best songs that Colin has written for the entire XTC discography. And the other 3 songs that Colin wrote on here are all incredible, with Day In, Day Out, 10 Feet Tall, and That Is the Way. And as far as the Andy Partridge tracks go, I think he was on top of his game throughout this record, writing some seriously unique tracks that sound unlike anything else to come out of the late 70s, with my personal favorites being Roads Girdle the Globe, Millions, and Complicated Game, which is a seriously dark and ominous track that concludes the album in the most eerie way possible. And similar to what I said about Roger Waters, I think Andy Partridge is another songwriter that has a really great ability to write these really dark and eerie sorts of tracks, and anytime he ventures into that sort of stylistic territory, I always love what comes out of that. And I think they knocked it out of the park with this album, giving us a few songs that have some resemblance to the styles that they were exploring on their first 2 records, but also venturing into completely new territories and doing a really great job of setting up a new sort of framework for them to continue to build off of on their future releases and really define this new era of the XTC sound. And for anybody interested, I also have a video ranking all of the XTC studio albums, so if you're interested in that, be sure to check out the tier list playlist linked in the comments and the description. So that is my number 1 favorite album of 1979. And to recap, at number 5 we had Fear of Music by Talking Heads. At number 4 we had Discovery by Electric Light Orchestra. Number 3 was The Wall by Pink Floyd. Number 2 was I Am by Earth, Wind & Fire. And number 1 was Drums and Wires by XTC. It's been so enjoyable going through this decade of the 70s and seeing how the music had evolved throughout this 9-year period. And I'm very excited to see the same process play out in the new decade of the 80s, which will be in our next video. So that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and please let me know what your top 5 favorite albums of 1979 are in the comments. I would love to see your lists. And stay tuned for my top 5 favorite albums of 1980. I'll see you then. Take care.